Welcome back to Voices of the Regenerative Decade here on One Earth Live. I'm Becca Dakini, your host, and I'd like to welcome our next guest, Jamaica Stevens. Welcome, Jamaica. Jamaica is an event producer, workshop leader, group facilitator, educational program designer, community organizer, project manager, writer, and life coach. Author and curator of the multimedia project, Re-inhabiting the Village, Co-creating Our Future, focusing on revitalizing a village ethos that fosters intercultural cooperation and sharing of collective intelligence to co-create solutions that benefit all. As an organizational design consultant and steward with Village Lab, Jamaica works with regenerative frameworks and whole systems principles to empower people, projects, and organizations to thrive. So it's great to have you join us today for the show, Jamaica. Great to see you. How are you? How are you doing today?
I'm well. I'm really honored to be here, and it's a very, very potent moment. So I'm doing really great, and I appreciate the invitation to come chat with you today.
Wonderful. Well, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and your work currently and within the regenerative movement.
Yeah, well, I think that the easiest way is to just broad stroke that I've been an eclectic player in, I think, first the communities movement, certainly the village movement, and now as it continues to evolve and sort of reveal itself to us, the regenerative movement, certainly for these last 12 or so years, but really if I think about it, probably all my life. A nature of lover, and the first teacher that I identify with were the cedar trees and the ferns and the nettles along the riverbed of the Sandy River, which I now live on here in Oregon, right at the mouth of the Columbia Gorge, and am raising my two children. And that's that first sense that I know of being a person of place and how deeply rooted that is. So yeah, I would say that that's my lifelong path, is to learn how to be in communion with the living world and understand my place within that. And the ethos of service is a through line throughout all of my work. I really believe in not only service, but seva, the act of sacred service. And so all of my work sort of spans a through line of how can I be in service to that which I love? How can I grow deeper in my communion with that which I love? And that's this earth, and therefore all the inhabitants within it. So I've done a lot of ways. And certainly you listed off the many hats I wear, the roles I've had. Mostly I feel like one of the things I love to do the most is just to simply be a weaver and a good listener, to be someone who's paying attention and doing my own evolutionary work, my own growth as a human, and then deeply listening to the world around me and trying to refine my antenna, and through listening bring synthesis, bring information, bring opportunities for more people to convene and come together, being a weaver of people. And when I see patterns of opportunity for more connection and more collaboration and more God, I feel like feeling that we're in this together, I just have naturally sort of said, oh, well, let's put that together. I just been weaving before I understood the maybe even importance or power of it. It just felt like the right thing to do was to convene. So I've done that through event series and building networks and growing, family amongst different leaders in the regenerative movement, the communities movement, and trying to just create meaningful connection, a place for us to actually heal and reveal our potential and our gifts in thoughtful containers that really bring up the best of our capacity to learn how to work together towards something. So I've done it a lot of ways. And I love working also with helping to design culture and helping, whether it's projects, organizations, communities, groups, or even family constellations, like look at how do we, and even people, like our personal culture, like what does that mean to discover our North Star and our deeply held beliefs and values, and then translate those values into practices and behaviors and frameworks and principles that then sort of guide everything we build. So I really love coming in and helping to introduce the concept of culture, shape culture, and grow our understanding what healthy culture is. And certainly regenerative culture has been, these last few years of my work has really been like, well, what are regenerative cultures? We hear about regenerative in terms of agriculture or medicine and health, and to apply the idea of a regenerative culture to the many cultures right now that are trying to make a shift towards something more life affirming. That's something that we're all growing into as a society. So I'm excited to be one of many practitioners and thinkers and folks who are trying to figure out how we actually build cultures that are regeneratively conscious.
Thanks, Jamaica. I would love to hear from you, from your own perspective. What is Earth regeneration and, you know, the regenerative movement that we're seeing emerge right now, and why do we need it so much at this time?
Well, I think for a long time, certainly from the movement of the 60s, which I see this kind of work as being intergenerational. I don't think it's up to any one generation, but it's many generations trying to sort of unravel a pattern of the industrial era that kind of was part of the colonial pattern that I think inherently separated people of place from natural relationship and communion with the living world. And I think that as that sort of systemic way of capitalism and consumerism sort of swept all around the planet, sort of uprooting the natural connection that most peoples of place had with the place that they live, I feel like we then kind of hit a threshold back in the 60s of the sustainability movement and the return back to the land and sort of this counterculture movement that made some beautiful progress in a revolutionary way. And I think here we are, and that was sort of, I'll say, my parents' generation. So now here we are at this realization that sustainable isn't enough, that sustainable to sustain the status quo of something that is actually still extracting and built upon a framework of beliefs about a disconnected relationship with life and the ability that resources actually are ours to consume. And if we sustain our current levels of consumption, the regenerative aspect to me is that it's actually not a returning to something that we can't actually return to. We live in a modern time, but it's actually a progression of deepening what the indigenous and originals peoples understood about our relationship with life and our obligation and responsibility to care for it well, and that when in balance, that we're always provided for and there's an abundance, and that actually humans were, and I think still are, and have the potential to be beneficial, co-creative, symbiotic species within the community of living ones on the planet. And so I feel like the regenerative movement is sort of like an evolutionary arc of our understanding and remembrance of something that I think is inherent to human nature, is our nature and our connection to life. And so I think it's a reawakening of something that actually we've been missing, and that has created a distortion and a lot of destruction. And now we're at a path of healing. And to me, the regenerative aspect is that it's not just enough to sustain, but we actually have to go and repair. We need to restore, we need to renew, we need to add life where we've taken and extracted life. We need to come back in and play agents of positive change and help be active agents of the planetary healing and our own societal healing through that process of reconnection and stewardship.
Well, on that tip, a lot of our shared work together actually has been around village and community building. Mostly within festival kind of environments, but also beyond. And I'm wondering what your reflections are on how this is central to the regenerative movement, or could be.
Well, I feel like the village ethos in particular is one that the kind of codes of village are, as the way that I've sort of perceived them, as things like intergenerationality, the fact that it's actually about reconnecting from cradle to grave. You're held in a circle, that you're held and honored through your progress in life, that we're re-bridging the relationship between the elders and the youngers. Along with intergenerationality and the connection between the different generations, the youngers and the elders, I think also just the sense of interculturalness, that we celebrate diversity is such a value of the village. And I realized that original village peoples may have actually had more of a tribal sense. And so that's maybe a distinction of our modern villages, is that truly it's about how do we celebrate the different diversity of peoples and different cultural aspects, because that's more true to our modern village. Also, codes of the village would include just interdependence, a sense that we actually deeply need each other, that we're influenced by and we influence each other. And especially now, I think, again, in a modern sense, we're recognizing that there is, with the internet and the sort of global societal web that right now feels very precarious, I think we're realizing we're very interdependent. And so how do we begin to actually operate that way? I think also with village, it's a sense of belongingness. It's a sense of belonging to people and place. So it's a sense of, it's not the time of the lone wolf. It can't be any longer the time of just sort of our personal experience or personal growth or personal development or personal needs. The village is the communal. It's the remembrance of the commons, and it's about stewarding the commons. It's about the common good. It's about the commons in terms of rights of nature and those commons resources that belong to everybody and belong to themselves. And it's about belonging to place. It's about actual deep communion with the places that we connect with. We don't always have to reside in, because really it's all part of the same system, but that we become advocates and stewards, and that we have like stewards of resources like our watersheds and our food sheds, and that we become eco-literate. That we actually become to be educated in and understand the natural systems and how our human systems overlap and connect and intersect, and how we influence those. So I feel like village sort of has these ethical codes and understandings, and it's a framework that, when applied with, certainly honoring how village has operated in the past, and what those also social spiritual aspects of village, the rites of passage of village, the way that it was sort of like, well, we're all here and woven. So a lot of village culture had a way of learning to have governance and decision making that was fair and equitable and reasonable and distributed, and also a way of acknowledging our own internal course correction. A lot of village culture has a way of saying, look, here's how you remediate action that has somehow wronged or stepped away from the good of the collective. These are just ideas and codes that I think we could look to many examples, but whether it's by honoring how village has been modeled in the past, or looking at how that same lens can be applied to our current context, I feel like returning to a sense as individuals and in our interpersonal relationships of learning what a village code is and how does it apply to our life, and choosing to shift our consciousness around sort of how our modern culture has us very separate, and to start moving towards connection and interdependence. I think we can start making choices when we start looking at these ethics and saying, well, where do I align? What feels true for me? How would I apply that in my life? What sort of action would I take? And I think that that's essential as the beginning starting place before we can get into sort of the regenerative movement. I think we have to start at village level. We have to start at our personal, interpersonal, communal, and local bioregional levels, and look at what changes we can make to kind of realign ourselves with an ethic that is life affirming, that is honoring and stewarding the commons, is accountable and responsible for the restorative work necessary socially and ecologically. And I think that when we turn ourselves towards how do we become villagers, not only the places we live, but then of the earth itself, then I think the regenerative practices and the regenerative sort of movement that is, I really think, a dawning of a new construct of how humans can relate to each other and to the planet. I think that then that naturally sort of, you see then how we can expand that to something that can be global, that you can have these nodal islands of coherence of a way of living in a different connectedness, that then if we can replicate and scale and make relevant in a diverse distributed context, then I think we can start to touch the regenerative movement. But I don't think the regenerative movement can happen as this sort of large architecture or like this really large theory or thesis without it actually actually anchoring into our daily lives and our daily practices and our daily relationships with the places we live and the people that we most kind of intimately commune with. So that's why I think the village is sort of an essential starting place that's approachable and that feels like a returning to a sense of something we know we've always been villagers. So it's actually returning to a sense of home. And then I think when you feel at home and you feel connected to a sense of home and belonging, I think naturally, I really believe naturally what arises from that are the frameworks necessary for then regenerative practices to sort of scale at a movement level. But I don't think it can happen as a movement until it happens first just in your own life.
Beautiful. Well, I think this is a good point to kind of look at where we are right now within this great pause, as you could say, due to the pandemic, and this, conversation around going back to normal and what does that look like and what is the opportunity that's at hand right now, with our civilization, quite frankly. Do we continue with the same structures as before, or do we choose to actually step out into a different structure that's more village focused, where people actually are able to live in village setting or connected to their others and connected to their community in a different way, which creates resiliency, versus being a separate nuclear family or individual selves. And, just there's a lot of questions right now around right livelihood. A lot of people have lost their work, and, it comes back to what creates value, and what is somebody's worth, and what are our systems, when you're talking about systems, like what are our systems that currently exist? Are they systems that help life to thrive? And, is there an opportunity at hand right now to actually redesign and look at the way society is operating, how we've fallen out of village culture and found ourselves wondering what our purpose is. I have some kind of strange, distant memories of some time where we lived in village setting, and we all had a function. We all worked together, and a lot of the times, if we were good at something, that's what we did. Therefore, if we loved what we did, it was what we contributed to the culture or the community. And so, what is it to find our purpose again within an ecosystem of a village, which then becomes a greater ecosystem of civilization, which then could link into the ecosystem of the planet. Do you think that we have an opportunity at hand right now to redesign and to rethink how we're operating in relation to how we self-organize, how we live, and how we work?
First of all, spot on. Yes to all of that. And I really do. And I'm not naive to the complexity of the moment. I'm not naive to the polarization happening, particularly in Western cultures. I'm not naive to the struggle and the suffering that is very real, and the fear and uncertainty that comes along with that. And the privilege and good fortune I have to be surrounded by what I see as revolutionary folks around the world who are responding to that crisis with this sort of, as Paul Hawken describes in The Blessed Unrest, it's sort of unseen, but is still vast and a very practical and effective movement that is uprising, which is that people of place are finding solutions to resolve and face those challenges and be creative and innovative and find new solutions. So it's happening already, but I think we don't see it. And I think it's still underground, like a mycelial network would be. And the conditions are now right and ripe. The rain has come. Something has changed in the biosphere of our of our social construct that now is making this the moment for right conditions to sort of have to reflect. It's sort of like when you're comfortable, maybe you recognize that something's out of balance, maybe you don't, any spectrum of full awareness that we are out of balance with our society and the degradation of the planet. And that it's not built to last, and that it is in fact crumbling and coming to a finite point, to the spectrum of maybe just some inkling that somehow there must be something else, right? That calling of, this doesn't feel right. Whatever the spectrum of people's awareness is, I think this has become the great equalizer. It's a moment where there's nothing to do but really look at our society and look at, in a moment of crisis, how adaptable are we? Because that's one of the first signs of resilience, is how adaptable. Can you rebound? Can you pivot? Can you change? Can you respond? intelligently and thoughtfully to continue to sort of, you know, not only survive, but even potentially thrive in times of change. So I think that this experience, this COVID experience, you know, whatever the theory is about how it came to be, I think that here it is. And I do think it's an opportunity that may not have catalyzed such a rapid opportunity for deep reflection and consideration, and also to kind of highlight where this system doesn't work, how flawed it is, how broken it is and has been. I think that's something that as long as it kind of chugs along, it's a little easier to play inside of a comfort zone that now is no longer comfortable. And these issues that I think have been coming to the surface for the last few years around socioeconomic justice and the economy that's absolutely not serving and certainly not serving the planet, let alone a predominant majority of the peoples on the planet. I think what we recognize as it's all kind of falling apart, like, well, we can either let it fall apart and have that turn into chaos, or a new order can emerge from a chaotic process. And I think that's what we're in, is that it does feel like a chaos, but chaos can be creative. And in fact, if there's anything I understand about a regenerative perspective, is that there's a life-death life cycle, that it's not just death and destruction or life, it's actually cyclical. And there's actually what has been created sort of has to compost and decompose, degenerate to feed new life, to feed something else. That is a regenerative cycle. So when I trust that deep knowing and learning that I'm in the midst of right now, and I watch what's happening, I think it's actually a positive thing to have a society that was not really functioning to finally like come to a place where it's no longer possible to sort of go back to normal. And I know that's hard, and there's a lot of grief for people, and I have certainly my own about how shocking that is to maybe that we don't go back. Yet I just can't help but again be in the perspective of what I'm watching occur, where there is so much innovation right now. There are so many people who are motivated now more than ever to take these theories and concepts and innovation and ideas we've been prototyping and practicing and learning and trying and, you know, not failing, but maybe composting. I think we're at a moment where there's enough maturation in this movement. There's enough capacity building that has been done, and certainly enough testing and prototyping of these sort of regenerative strategies and solutions that we actually are at a moment where we can begin to apply them. We can begin to test them out more openly. And I think there's more openness and willingness to making great change that I don't think could have even been possible or was considered very fringe or sort of like, well, why would you? Everything's fine. And I think realizing everything's not fine and hasn't been working gives us an opportunity. If we can pivot towards innovation, I think we actually have a tremendous opportunity. And that's what I've seen. I've seen people step up, organizations, networks, and say, we're more charged up than ever to be the antidote to what's crumbling, and to turn fear into opportunity, challenge into opportunity, and to go ahead and try out these new ideas and these new tests and these new, you know, let's be bold, because what better moment would there to be but to try to guide this sort of chaotic moment into a new order. So that's what I'm witnessing happen. And again, I'm not arrogant to say like, oh, we've all got it all figured out. There's a lot of growth ahead of us. There's a lot of challenge ahead. It's not a simple thing. And yet, if we come back to that village ethos, if people find resilience in their own life and realign themselves with the village ethos in their own life, in their own communities, and in local, place-based, regional coherence, I think this might force a shift towards, you have to work together with people. You actually have to remember how to grow your own food. You actually have to sort of support your local businesses to get people thriving, your neighbors thriving again, versus sort of ordering from Amazon. I think it gives us an opportunity to rethink what we want to do with our lives, maybe reskill ourselves, retool ourselves for more of an artisan culture that's more locally focused, and also to protect what's ours, to protect our resources, to be advocates, because it's more precious, because, you know, that realization of how much we need local coherence is more true than ever. So I feel like, yeah, I do feel like it's an opportunity to reset and to think more communally minded. And I think that might ease the tension of people trying to do it alone. I think we just got forced into a fact where we're like, well, most families can't make it alone anymore. They might have to move in with intergenerational parents or choose to live with a group of friends, right? Like we're going to have to pool together childcare resources so people can work. Like I just think that this deep strain could force a realignment towards a sense of interdependence that then could spark the conditions for some of these regenerative theories to be more accessible, more approachable. But yeah, I'm not pretending it's not complex. It's very complex.
Well, Jamar, do me a favor and jump forward with me to 2030 and just vision, if you would, like maybe even 2040, you know, jump forward a decade or so. And what does the new world look like? You know, if it could be the way you wanted it to be, if we had figured out how to mobilize everybody and do the work together that needs to be done for the planet, what kind of a world could we be living in?
Well, first I'll say it's sort of a choose your own adventure. And so as I feel into that, it's sort of like, there's a couple different ways I can imagine it. There's certainly ones I have more preference towards, Becca. Things I hope happen. And also trends that I see that may not be my preference, but may be a part of the global trend. I certainly think that technology is advancing in a way we can't even possibly fathom, but we're still learning to understand just like how fast we're actually keeping up with how fast technology is advancing and how to apply it in thoughtful ways. I could see there being an advance in technology that actually liberates humanity from certain kind of an industrial era on the backs of people is industry built. And I think technology can actually liberate so that people can actually do what is unique to humans, which is the more creativity, like our artisan culture can rebirth by leveraging technology. I think that that's one thing that can advance. I think that we have the opportunity to understand more of the world around us because of the information available to us through internet. I think that we can create more global coherence and interconnection and understanding if we can leverage technology for good and instead of ill. I think that it can be a tool for a truly global society to emerge. I think that which I'm a novice to, but in my tracking, I'm understanding that with blockchain and distributed technologies and social ledgers is an opportunity for a new governance system that is actually sovereign and accountable, and that actually is of the people and by the people, that's non-corruptible, because data itself, I'm learning a lot right now about data sovereignty. So I think that we are actually on the tip of that potential, and how that would change our current governing, our global dominance system to actually have more power and more control of both our economic resources and also our information resources in the hands of people. So again, I'm a student at that, but I think that that is on the horizon and is emerging. I think the cryptocurrencies and the new forms of currency are very relevant and will be more developed by then. Again, my hope with these things is that they're guided well by the best intelligence we have and not corrupted. And that's where I hesitate, but I'm going to put the energy towards what I think could be possible and how that could actually grow global citizenry. Meaning that instead of people, this schism between erudite, maybe elite, well-educated, perhaps wealthy folk who then are dominant of the power, but that we actually might have a revolution of the people, and that we might actually, there might be an opportunity for social justice to actually uplift people who've been constantly pressed to the bottom and their backs are the ones walked upon for progress. I feel like we are at a tipping point where there's enough of an awareness. And again, I just really want to honor that I have a very limited and narrow perspective. And I am a white person of privilege, so I want to be thoughtful of how I say this, but I do see a movement of social justice that is a new renaissance. I think another wave of that is going to come, and I hope that it moves towards a sense of true equality and liberation of oppressed and marginalized peoples, that we grow a global citizenry that's capable, that's educated, that's empowered, and that can truly, each person, as you named it in the village, can share their gift, and we can actually self-govern and reclaim some of that sense of dominance and power. I think that's really possible. My heart tells me that we have the potential, and that there is a movement towards reconnection with the living earth, and a relationship and a communion and a restoration process that's actually got us restoring stream banks and planting willows so that the salmon can return to cool, shady waters. You know, that we actually are cleaning the plastics out of the ocean. You know, that we're actually looking to reduce our extraction and reuse and recycle materials, and be more creative with the industries that we've had that can actually sort of stop the extractive madness. I think renewable energies and technologies are absolutely already here, and that it's almost ridiculous that we haven't adopted them, but I could see that being more common and more mainstream. Is that, yes, you save your rainwater, and yeah, you use solar and you use alternative energies that are just more intelligent, perhaps, quite frankly, even free energies, which is very radical to say, but that technology and information already exists. I think it's been suppressed, and I could see potentially there being a liberation of a whole different construct of how we approach energy and meeting those needs. I think that transportation will transform, and the way we move around the planet, I think that's already happening. We may become less globally connected in a physical realm and more globally connected internet, and actually stay a little closer to home. I don't know that, but I'm watching as the travel industry changes from this. There may be more of a sort of returning to a sense of revitalizing the local place, a bioregionalism, thriving bioregionalism, and a focus on taking care of, you know, of where we are and becoming stewards. So, I mean, all of these things, I think more people remembering how to grow their own food and use wild medicines, and actually a renaissance in the medicinal movement in terms of allopathic sort of medicine that, again, in the industrial area, arced away from natural remedies of indigenous peoples who have, you know, healed throughout the ages by using and having a relationship with local plants. I think that that is a renaissance that's going to reemerge as our healing capacity and our intelligence to work with the natural world and food as medicine to heal ourselves, and to use more sort of alternative therapies that I think will transform the medical industry. I think education is transforming and will transform. I'm curious how this sort of generation who may for at least a few years grow up taking all online classes, I'm curious to how that will impact, but I think our children are going to advance beyond us in ways we can't understand, because they have access to things that even in my generation I didn't have. So I think that there's a reapproach to on land and online learning, and more immersive, project-based, skill-based learning that really honors whole people. I think that that's possible, and a movement that I already see people working on. Yeah, maybe even just a spiritual revolution. It's sometimes a little edgy for me to admit that, but I think that we're in the middle of a rite of passage as a species. I think that there's a consciousness dawning, and I sense that we'll be through a big block of a sort of catalytic moment in that next 10 years that I would be very curious to see if we didn't emerge with greater understanding of our place in the cosmos, of what it is to be. I think of regenerative human as an iterative human, that you're sort of kind of always being reborn, you're lifelong learning, you're dying to versions of yourself in order to birth a new consciousness or a new understanding of yourself, a new identity, a new version. And I actually hope and pray that we liberate ourselves from a stuck place of a young, uninitiated species, and actually evolve to a more matured, more aware species. And that happens not on an individual but communal levels, that we move more towards a communalism, a sense of we, that the time of the I and the kind of hero's journey is ending, and that it's a transcendent include moment. It's not that we won't still have that mythos of the hero's journey, but I do believe that we're moving toward the journey of a steward, which is the caretaker, which is the one who turns and gives in service back to what it sort of was destroyed in the hero's journey. So yeah, I guess these are just some things that I, think are possible, see on the horizon, know people actively working. I'm actively an agent in making these sort of large system scale changes. And I think they're highly possible. I also am hesitant because I think just right beyond that is it's a razor's edge that requires us to not be too assumptive or almost hopeful without really looking at the stark reality and attending to the very complex issues, because I believe that it's just as easy for the energy to get swayed in a whole other direction. I keep thinking of Starhawk and the Fifth Sacred Thing, and what that book depicts in terms of the polarization of the worst of the worst and the best of the best. And I've always aimed myself towards like the description in that book of the society that exists and the liberation of those people and the deep wovenness and the way that there's a spirit of life that moves through the councilship that they share, and that there's a voice for nature included in that, a reunion with ourselves as part of a living system. I can't help but say, that's where I'm going to put my energy. We may get there, we may not, but I'm going to put everything I have towards that direction. And what I'm so grateful for is when I look around me, I'm not alone in it at all. Some of the most capable, brilliant people I know are on this path, and we're fired up right now. We're motivated. We're dedicated. We've done the hard work. We're doing the hard work. We understand it's going to be hard work, and we're here. And we're here for, the generations to come, and we're here for ourselves, and we're here for the ancestors who were part of getting us to where we are. So that's where I hope we head, and that's where I'm going to put our my energy, our energy towards heading that way. I'm sure I missed some things, but there's a lot there.
It's a beautiful vision, and it's one I hold with you. And thank you so much for such nourishing dialogue with you today. It's been beautiful, Jamaica, and just super appreciate your wisdom and depth. So thank you for being such a strong voice for the regenerative decade and regenerative movement. Super appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. It's an honor. Thanks for hosting these important dialogues. I really appreciate.
Yeah, well, we're coming to the end of our time now, and I'm just wondering if you have any information on how people can find more about your work, any websites, anything you'd like to point to so people can find you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, JamaicaStevens.com is the easiest one to get a hold of me directly, and it has sort of what I do and who I am on it. Certainly checking out villagelab.net. We're doing a revamp right now, but I'm very excited about the frameworks and architectures for this new movement that are emerging from that space. And definitely the reinhabitingthevillage.com. Certainly there's the stories that were told in our collective in that artifact. So reinhabitingthevillage.com is another great space to check out.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Jamaica Stevens. I'm Becca Dakini, your host. You've been listening and viewing Voices of the Regenerative Decade as part of One Earth Live. Thanks again, Jamaica, and I'll see you again soon.
Yeah, thank you, Becca. Mm-hmm.